An $80 million private jet lost cabin pressure at 30,000 feet 11 minutes after the CEO laughed at the mechanic who tried to stop it from taking off. He was broke. He drove a truck worth less than her watch, and he was the only person in that hangar who knew exactly what was about to happen. Archer Hayes knelt beside the aircraft's technical bay reading 3 numbers on a tablet that didn't match each other, small drifts, the kind of thing everyone else would call nothing. He asked for 90 minutes to check it properly. Celeste Mercer, CEO of Mercer Aerodyne, refused before he finished the sentence. She had a $210 million contract signing waiting in Washington. She was not about to lose it to a man in a worn jacket. Behind his tools, half hidden, sat a torn shipping label with a name that shouldn't have been anywhere near this aircraft. He photographed it. He didn't say a word about it yet. Celeste's own maintenance crew signed off on the jet in under a minute. Archer refused to sign anything, and because of that, he was required to board the flight himself, seated in the back, out of sight, exactly where she wanted him. 19 minutes later, the wheels left the ground. 40 minutes after that, the lights went out. If you love stories where the person everyone dismissed turns out to be the only one who could save them, stay with this one to the end. It only gets heavier from here. And hit subscribe because stories built this carefully take real time, and that's exactly why we never rush them. Archer Hayes woke up at 4:40 a.m. every day, whether work was scheduled or not. His apartment sat above a hardware store in Chesapeake, Virginia, rent $1,150 a month. His coffee maker was 9 years old, handle cracked, never fixed, because fixing other people's aircraft paid the bills, not his own kitchen. His daughter June was 20, 3 states away, studying structural engineering on a scholarship that covered most of her tuition. Archer covered the rest, picking up whatever freelance maintenance contracts came through his 3 regional brokers. He never turned down a job that paid on time. He'd been doing this for 6 years, since his wife Marissa died of pancreatic cancer 11 weeks after her diagnosis. June was 14. That same week, Archer turned down a federal aviation safety position that would have kept him traveling 200 days a year. He never told anyone why. He just needed to be home for school pickup. Nobody at the airfield knew any of this. To them, he was a name on a subcontractor list, a man who drove a truck worth less than some client's dinner tab. He never corrected anyone who assumed he was simple. He'd learned that correcting people cost more than it saved. He called June before every job, not because he had to, because it was the one part of his day that had nothing to do with anyone else's aircraft. That morning, the call lasted 4 minutes. She asked if he was heading back to fix something for the rich and difficult again. He laughed and told her a pressurization fault didn't care whose name was on the ownership papers. She told him to be careful. He said he always was. Neither of them knew that in 6 hours, a captain he hadn't spoken to in 11 years would be shouting his name over an interphone at 30,000 feet.
Archer arrived at the hangar 90 minutes before departure. The ground coordinator handed him a tablet with the pre-flight log already marked complete by the airline's own maintenance crew. He read it anyway. He always read it anyway. The secondary pressurization system was responding slower than it should. Not enough to fail a standard check, just enough to notice if you were looking for it, which nobody else was. He climbed into the technical bay and found a second problem sitting right beside the first. A valve signal running late by less than 2 seconds. On its own, meaningless. Next to the pressurization drift, it stopped looking like coincidence. Then he found it. A torn shipping label wedged behind a wire bundle, half burned at one corner, stamped with a supplier name that had no business being anywhere near this aircraft. He photographed it and said nothing. A label wasn't proof. It was just a question with no answer yet. He brought his numbers to the lead technician on the internal crew. The man glanced at the screen for 4 seconds and shrugged it off. Everything read within range. Archer said, individually, sure. Together, they were behaving like one problem, not 3. The technician said the jet needed to be wheels up soon, and the paperwork was already signed. Archer asked for a manual inspection of the switchgear. He was told there wasn't time. Neither man raised his voice. Both of them understood the conversation was already over. Archer filed his concern in writing anyway. Minutes later, word came back. The CEO had just arrived at the hangar, and she was not going to like what she was about to hear. If you've ever spotted something everyone else waved off and been told to sit down and stay quiet about it, you already know exactly where this story is going. Stay close and hit subscribe because we take the time to build these properly, fact by fact, and that's the only way a story like this earns your trust. Celeste Mercer walked into the hangar already on a call, her assistant typing beside her without looking up. Her CFO carried a portfolio full of numbers tied to a signature waiting in Washington. Her legal counsel walked half a step ahead of everyone, already talking before anyone asked him anything. Archer met them near the aircraft stairs and gave his findings flat, no performance in it. 3 systems, each one inside tolerance alone. Together, they were behaving like a single fault working its way through the plane. The legal counsel spoke first. He said the signing would not move, that competitors had been circling this contract for months, and any delay handed them the opening they'd been waiting for. The CFO added that every hour of delay carried a real cost, one they couldn't afford today of all days. Archer waited until they finished. Then he said none of that changed what the aircraft's pressurization system was currently doing. Celeste looked at him for a long moment, the jacket, the tool bag, the truck parked outside her hangar, and asked if he understood what was riding on this flight. He said yes. She asked if he had any authority to ground the aircraft. He said not if her own team certified it. She asked why he was still standing there then. He said because he hadn't been proven wrong yet, and 30,000 feet is a bad place to find out 3 small warnings had been pointing at the same thing all along. She turned to her lead technician. He confirmed again that everything read within limits. He signed the certification. Archer signed nothing, and because of that, he was required to board the flight himself. Celeste told her flight attendant, loud enough for the row behind her to hear, to seat Archer in the back, away from her team. Nobody laughed out loud. A few gave thin smiles. Archer picked up his bag and walked to the rear of the aircraft without a word. Minutes later, the cabin door closed. The jet began its taxi toward the runway, carrying 15 executives, 4 crew members, and 1 photo still sitting unexplained on a mechanic's phone. If you've ever watched a room full of confident people talk over the one person who was actually right, you know exactly the feeling this story is about to deliver. Stay with it. It's about to get a lot more real at altitude. And if stories built this carefully are worth your time, hit subscribe. That's what keeps us able to do this right instead of fast.
The jet lifted off and climbed into a gray, banked sky. In the forward cabin, Celeste ran through her pitch one more time for the Washington meeting, her voice smooth from repetition. Nobody in that cabin noticed the irony sitting quietly in the back row. Archer opened the aircraft's data feed on his tablet and watched. At low altitude, a sensor drifted out of range for a few seconds, then snapped back to normal. As the jet climbed higher, the pressurization system took nearly 3 times longer than it should to respond to a routine altitude change. Archer stopped watching the numbers one at a time. He started watching the shape they made together. He'd seen this shape once before, years earlier, on a different aircraft, in a job most people had forgotten he ever worked. A part that tested fine sitting still and failed only under real pressure at altitude. Technically functional, completely wrong for the system it had been forced into. He asked the flight attendant to relay a message to the cockpit. The anomaly from the ground hadn't resolved, it was getting worse, and the crew should move to manual control before climbing further. The first officer checked his gauges and said everything read normal. Archer asked for the captain directly. The name that came back over the interphone stopped him for half a second, a man he hadn't spoken to in 11 years, and the moment that man heard who was calling, he didn't hesitate to open the channel himself. "What are you seeing?" the captain asked. Archer laid it out in 4 sentences.
Three systems behaving as one, the rate of deviation increasing with altitude, the likely point of failure, and a warning, do not keep climbing until it's isolated. The captain went quiet for 3 seconds. Then he told his first officer to check the switchgear sequence by hand, something the checklist had never told him to look for because nobody had ever told him what to look for. They found the deviation in under a minute. It was small, it was real. And with 6 minutes left before scheduled cruising altitude, the cabin lights flickered for the first time. If you've ever felt the moment right before everyone else finally sees what you saw all along, this is exactly what's coming next. Stay with it and hit subscribe because stories worth building carefully deserve to be watched the same way. The lights flickered again, longer this time, almost 2 full seconds. Archer was already moving before it ended, tablet in one hand, reaching for the aft panel with the other. The pressurization display jumped from amber to red, held there, then dropped back to amber. Not a resolution, a pattern closing in on itself. The aircraft rolled through a dense cloud band and shuddered, turbulence landing directly on top of a system already running on failing logic. Archer understood immediately what that meant. He told the flight attendant, without raising his voice, to relay one message to the cockpit. Reduce altitude now. Isolate the circuit. Switch to manual pressurization. The first officer repeated that the readings were within range. Archer asked to speak to the captain directly. "How sure are you?" the captain asked. Archer said he was sure enough that he didn't want his daughter reading about the outcome before he had the chance to call her himself. The captain didn't ask a second question. He began coordinating a precautionary descent and turned the aircraft toward the nearest airport with a certified maintenance team on the ground. Celeste rose from her seat and walked to the back of the cabin. She told Archer he'd frightened her team for nothing and put her signing at risk. Archer said he hadn't disrupted her flight. The fault in her own aircraft had done that before she ever boarded, and the only open question now was whether she'd land with enough information to actually fix it. The cabin went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when confidence and reality stop matching. The warning light held long enough this time for the whole forward cabin to see it clearly. Nobody smiled this time. Archer guided the captain through the isolation by radio, short, exact instructions, the kind that only come from having done this before, in conditions where a mistake wasn't theoretical. The amber light went dark. The aircraft steadied. Then the captain's voice came through the interphone, and it carried through the entire cabin. "Commander Hayes, I need you on this channel." 15 executives turned toward the back row at once, toward the man they'd been told to ignore less than an hour earlier, toward a title none of them had expected to hear attached to him at all. If you've ever waited your whole life for the room to finally say your name the right way, this is that moment, and it's only the beginning of what comes next. Stay with it and hit subscribe because stories worth building carefully deserve to be watched the same way.
Archer moved to the front of the cabin for the first time, not to claim space, because the captain needed a direct line and the system ran cleaner at close range. He asked for the aft panel to be opened and examined the pressurization assembly by hand. What he found matched what the data had been suggesting since the hangar. The component wasn't a manufacturer-specified part. It was a substitute, functional on its own, but built for a different thermal response than this aircraft system required. As pressure increased with altitude, the delay compounded until the system misread cabin altitude by a margin small enough to hide and large enough to matter. The captain flew the descent exactly as Archer guided him, gradual, controlled, no sudden moves. He wasn't taking orders, he was taking counsel from someone whose read on the failure was sharper than any checklist on board. Over the internal channel, the captain gave Celeste the account she hadn't asked for. Archer Hayes, he said, was a former commander and tactical aviation safety advisor who'd spent over a decade on military and federal flight programs. The captain had trained under him years earlier when the work was classified and the stakes weren't hypothetical. Archer left that life after his wife died to raise his daughter alone and kept doing the only thing he'd ever been exceptional at, finding the fault before it found the aircraft. Celeste said nothing. She looked down the length of the cabin at the man she'd sent to the back row, and the authority she'd used against him in the hangar had nowhere left to attach itself. Her legal counsel tried to regain control, saying any technical talk on board should be limited given legal exposure. He was answered before he finished. Federal protocol required every word of an in-flight anomaly to be preserved, not buried. Archer looked at him for a moment and said nothing at all. The silence said enough. Someone had let this part near the aircraft on purpose, and everyone standing here knew it. If you've ever watched the truth stop being about one mistake and start being about a decision someone made deliberately, you know exactly why this part of the story matters most. Stay with it. The ground is where this really unravels. And hit subscribe, because stories built this carefully only work when every fact is earned, not rushed. The airport came into view through breaking clouds. The captain brought the jet down with the kind of precision that only comes from 40 minutes spent at the edge of something serious. When the wheels touched, there was no relief in the cabin, just the quiet of 15 people who understood they'd passed through something real, and that the real story was only starting on the ground. The maintenance team on the ground completed a full inspection within hours. Their findings matched Archer's diagnosis with the kind of precision that ends arguments. The pressurization switchgear was a mismatched component from a supplier that had never appeared on the company's approved list. The wiring in the aft bay had been rerouted in a way that didn't match the manufacturer's specifications. The maintenance log described the work in language broad enough to hide exactly what had been skipped. Celeste's assistant had already built a file by then. She laid it out in a small office at the edge of the airfield. The supplier had been brought in through the legal counsel's office, with a bid tens of thousands of dollars below the nearest certified alternative, and a turnaround time the certified firm had called impossible without cutting corners. The FIO found the rest. The cost savings from using that supplier had been written directly into the company's financial summary, the same summary already sent to the federal partners waiting on the signature. The savings were real, so was the risk purchased with them. Celeste confronted her legal counsel in the hallway. He said the fault sat within a range reasonable people could call acceptable. Archer, walking past, stopped and said that in aviation, reasonable usually was a word found in reports written after something had already gone wrong, and the gap between a precaution and a headline was normally just one ignored warning.
That night, the video call with the federal partners and the board convened across time zones. Her legal counsel had a statement ready, blaming weather. Celeste set it face down and never used it. She told the room the truth in full. The fault, her decision to override the warning, and the mismatched part traced back to a subcontractor chosen on cost. Then she handed the floor to Archer. He walked the room through the failure without theatrics, the component, the pattern, the log written to obscure what had actually happened. He ended by saying the technology wasn't the problem. The problem was whether the company selling it held itself to the same standard it demanded from everyone else. The board suspended the legal counsel from the project within an hour. The federal partners paused the signing for 30 days, pending an independent audit with Archer Hayes named to lead the technical review. If you've ever needed the truth to finally win, not through revenge, but simply by being heard, that's exactly what just happened here, and it's why we take the time to build stories this way, one fact at a time. If that's worth something to you, hit subscribe. It's the only reason we get to keep doing it right. The 30-day audit remade the company faster than anyone expected. The supplier was removed from every approved list and referred to federal certification review. The legal counsel resigned within 2 weeks. The audit turned up 2 more instances of substandard parts, smaller, but enough to justify everything Archer had flagged from the start. The contract was signed a month later than planned, with new language requiring independent verification of every component before installation, oversight that would have seemed excessive before that flight and now read like the bare minimum. Celeste didn't become a softer version of herself. She stayed sharp, demanding, difficult in the ways that had built her company in the first place.
What changed was what she attached those qualities to. She issued a company-wide directive. Any technical warning, no matter how small, had to be documented and reviewed by an independent party before a departure decision could be finalized. The directive didn't name Archer. It didn't need to. He turned down the full-time advisory role she offered. He agreed to a limited consultancy instead, on his own schedule, the kind that let him keep picking his daughter up on weekends and rebuilding engine parts in his workshop on Tuesdays. He never wanted the title back. He'd only ever wanted the aircraft to land safely. A few weeks later, his daughter came home for the weekend and found him in the workshop, same as always. She asked how the flight had gone. He said a warning got ignored, then it got heard. She asked if the CEO had apologized. He said, eventually, yes. Celeste showed up at that workshop not long after, alone, no assistant, no schedule trailing behind her. She brought a photograph of the repaired aircraft, its pressurization system rebuilt to specification. On the back, in the captain's handwriting, the warning we should have heard sooner. She told Archer she'd once said he didn't belong on her jet. She said she'd been wrong about what belonging meant. He handed the photograph back and told her to keep it. If this story stayed with you, the kind where the person nobody noticed turns out to be the one holding everything together, that's exactly what we build here, one fact at a time. Subscribe if you want more stories told this way. And if you've ever been the one underestimated in a room that should have known better, tell us in the comments. We read every one.